Time to blow your mind with historical homos.
Picture this. The year is 1777. You're at the Chateau of Versailles, just a few clicks away from gay Paris. In the next room sits Queen Marie Antoinette and her boring as fuck husband, King Louis XVI. You're about to meet them. It's not the first time you've met royalty. That is not the issue. The issue is that for the first 50 years of your life, you've been Charles d'Eon, a spy, soldier, and diplomat, and a damn good one at that. But, ladies and gentlemen, today is different. Today is a challenge because, for the first time in your life, you'll present to the King and Queen as Charlotte, not Charles. This, my friends, is the story of Mademoiselle d'Eon, who publicly transitioned her gender 250 years ago. This brave, brilliant figure, who was assigned male at birth, was genuine in her desire to live as a woman. But she had no idea that doing so would force her to live with all of the indignities of womanhood in 18th century France. Now, get your Speedos on and come in. The water's human temperature. How was that?
Beautiful, Donal. Really moved me. 2 notes. First, don't ever do that again. Second, do something infinitely better.
Okay.
Does that help?
So let's go back in time and take another rewrite through our history. Celebrate ourselves tonight and cover all the things that's still a mystery. 'Cause if you think you know, you don't know. Around the world we go, 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 go. Time to blow your mind with historical homos. Historical homos. Historical homos.
All right, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Historical Homos. I'm Donal Brophy.
And I'm Bash. So excited to talk about this figure today. It's a real doozy. The Chevalier d'Eon was one of the most famous figures in the 18th century. Really had a crazy life. Spy, soldier, trans woman. It's a complicated story. It's confusing. They made up a lot of shit about their life later on after they had transitioned to becoming a woman. So maybe first a little bit of context, though, on like where we are in the world. 18th century France, it's full of scammers, full of intrigues, lots of people, trying to get money, get position at Versailles, lots of people who are trying to move up the social ladder in one way or another.
Don't you just absolutely love this particular period, though, in general? I was
I'm
so
obsessed with it.
excited for this little kind of trip today because it's such an interesting time in French history, but also human history.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of new ideas. Science, for once, is happening. And it's a big century for women. There are a lot of women in power. Madame de Pompadour, and you will be hearing my most obnoxious French accent for the remainder of this episode. You're welcome. Madame de Pompadour, she is the mistress of King Louis XV. She is basically running the show while Louis is whoring and boozing. And
She's the Kardashian mom of the whole situation.
she's the momager of the whole situation. And there's Empress Elisabeth running Russia, and later Catherine the Great. There's Maria Theresa, mother of Marie Antoinette, who's running Austria. So women are in power, and that's actually giving all the men in society a bit of anxiety.
Right. And would you say the zeitgeist is edging? Can I explain myself a little bit?
Please say more.
I have a theory on this particular period and how humanity's just about to bust a nut, right? I'll tell you what, because we're literally on the cusp of the French Revolution. Like in the greater scheme of things, we've got 15, 20 years.
Give 40.
Give 40
Give or
years
take
to go.
40
Give or
years.
take 40 years. And the American War of Independence is just about to bust its nut. So all of this kind of Enlightenment kind of like thought is about to entrer. Can I try the French accent?
No.
It's supposed to enter stage left. Anyway, enough of that theory. Carry on, Bash.
No, but you're right. It's
You
things
know?
are coming to a head.
Right.
More dick words, and that actually does play out in gender issues as well. So women are becoming more powerful, but by the same token, men seem to be becoming more womanly.
A lot of gender bending going on.
Yeah, but like it's subtle. It's gender bending light. Like
There's nothing subtle about a powdered wig and a face of lead makeup, darling.
minus the makeup and the wig, but the jacket sort of dresses that they're wearing. I always think of that, you know, because
Sure.
it starts to almost look like the silhouette of a skirt. And so it's things like that where you can see that for aristocratic men, at least, they are definitely not, you know, the sort of swashbuckling sword carrying people that they were in like the 1500s or whatever. So life is changing. Daon is a very active intellectual. This is the Enlightenment, lots of new ideas about what women can do. And Daon is very involved in that discourse and that debate. So the other thing about Daon is that she's living in this, and we're going to use he, she, they throughout because Daon used he and she throughout their life at different points. But the interesting thing about the 18th century is there are also a bunch of precedents for women who dress as men and try to live as the opposite gender. So you have these sort of female husbands in the 18th and 19th century who dress as men, marry, typically in like small little bumblefuck villages somewhere, you know, in Germany or whatever. And some of them get caught, some of them get punished, but some of them also just lead fabulous lives, like in domestic bliss with one another. And then, of course, there was Joan of Arc, who was the big precedent for a girlie dressing up as a boy and going off to war.
Patron saint of non-binary, or you know, essentially, she's kind
Definitely.
of queer. I mean, growing up Catholic myself, I always thought Joan of Arc and Saint Sebastian were almost
Thank
like
you.
the patron. I know I didn't want to leave in that for you. We're almost like the patron saints of the LGBT kind of community, essentially.
Yeah, we have to do an episode on Saint Sebastian.
Absolutely.
So hot.
Yeah.
Penetrated by all those arrows. So
Wasn't there a Halloween costume? You could probably Google Sebastian Hendra Halloween.
Oh, yeah,
costume.
well,
Every year Saint Sebastian. So
every day I'm Saint Sebastian. So we have the female husbands. We have Joan of Arc. We also have a woman named Hannah Snell and some pirates who dress as men and go off and fight in the Navy on ships. You know, so women are kind of getting out there and doing their thing in very interesting, different ways.
Act 1. Becoming Monsieur Daon. Am I saying that right?
Back to the Chevalier Daon. Oh, wait, I have to do my most obnoxious accent for his full name, which is Charles Geneviève Louis Auguste André Timothée Daon de Beaumont. You like that?
That's more than a double barrel name. That's a
Yeah, that really tickles.
quadruple, double. Carry on.
No, it's good. You're good with numbers. So the Chevalier Daon is actually not born the Chevalier Daon. He's born just regular Daon. And 1728, low-ranking noble family, so he has to work for his keep, which is very gauche, but has to happen. He's kind of a sickly, shy child who's really into books, basically me. And he doesn't really have any girlfriends or boyfriends. You know, it's kind of like a sad, lonely childhood for Daon. He's also born in Burgundy, which becomes important because Burgundy is big wine country. So he's going to use that to his advantage when he becomes a spy and has to, you know, what's the word? Bribe people with wine and trinkets and gifts and stuff like that. But yeah, so he has this kind of sad, lonely, boring childhood. He becomes a really good fencer and a really good student, moves to Paris, whips out Grindr, and gets on Grindr for what we all do on Grindr, which is what? Networking. So he's having a fabulous time, and he writes a book on public finance that for some reason makes him
That's so random.
really
that
famous.
The book on public finance
Yeah,
just came
this
out of
episode
nowhere.
really isn't starting out well with this figure who writes about public finance and never has sex.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's exciting that they moved to Paris and stepped off the Greyhound bus and just swang around.
Yeah, but it's like dip your wick, honey. Like Paris is fun at this time. Like lots of shit is going on.
Yeah.
Lots of parties. So he quickly meets, because of this public finance book that just rocks everybody's socks, he meets the Prince de Conti, which in English is pronounced the Prince of Cunty.
Okay.
I like to imagine him with just sort of a undulating flaps,
The Last
clam
of Us kind
head.
of a vibe, like a
Yeah, absolutely. So Cunty is this really big deal because he's the king's cousin.
The Prince of Cunty is the prince.
The Prince of Cunty is King Louis's cousin. So he's already a big deal in Paris, in Versailles, and he becomes D'Eon's patron. That's kind of how life works for the aristocrats at this point. Whoever's a bigger fish than you helps you climb the ladder. So D'Eon actually meets the king at a drag masquerade ball, which is something that the 18th century Europeans in general love to do, where everybody shows up in the opposite gender. So D'Eon goes, and he's already kind of a slender little man and also has a very high-pitched voice naturally. So he meets the king in drag, and the king is like really into him and wants to make out with him.
Wow.
So he at some point utters those famous words of, "Can we go somewhere private and talk?" And then they go to this like little room wherever the king does his stripping, and then D'Eon is like, "I'm actually a boy." Incredible impression. And the king thinks it's hilarious and is like, "Oh my God, how funny that you actually have a penis when I thought you had a vagina." So they become best friends over that, and the king is like, "Hey, do you want to come work for me?" And he wants him to work for him specifically as a spy.
That's a pretty meteoric rise, wouldn't you say? Like, I mean,
Yeah, he's like
on
24.
on the social ladder, like, provincial, aristocratic kind of like has to do the actual grape crushing kind of like son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And then literally writes the book on finance, nerd alert, meets the fucking Prince of Cunty. Next thing you know, the king's trying to, bend him over the goddamn, four-poster bed. Anyway, just thought I'd make a note of that. She's not a social climber, she's a social mountaineer, but sorry. You know what I mean?
I love that. No, she is. The D'Eon moves quickly, right? And so they're only in their early 20s at this point.
Must have been very charming,
Yes,
but,
definitely. And also good at improv, I think, to be able to play along with that whole thing and act. And I think
Because I would imagine there'd be a lot of people trying to get into the
king's pants,
the king's codpiece or whatever. And this is good old King Louis the 14th, right?
No, Louis the 15th.
Louis the 15th.
Louis the 15th.
Yeah, who was he was the longest reigning monarch in French history, wasn't he?
Yeah,
It's
long ass time because he was king.
Was he the Sun King?
No, Louis the 14th is the Sun King.
Okay. Right,
Yes.
I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm here to help.
Man in the Iron Mask is one of my favorite books around that
Yeah.
time.
Oh my God, I love that movie.
Amazing.
Favorite childhood movie.
Yeah.
So D'Eon gets hired as a spy, probably because they're really good at this improv, and playing along and acting.
Good casting.
Yeah. And so D'Eon's first mission becomes going to Russia to help secure a treaty between Russia and France.
Right.
Because the king's secret service, there's no like central intelligence agency, there's no CIA, there's no FBI. The king just has his private network of spies like every other aristocrat has.
Right.
So D'Eon's in a good one, he's in the most prestigious one, but the whole point of the king's secret network at this point is to get Cunty on the Polish throne.
Of course, Cunty wants to be the king of Poland.
Cunty wants a throne because he's tired of being, second wheel, third wheel, whatever.
Yeah.
What's that thing
And
called?
at the time, Poland was like a puppet state, wasn't it? Like it oscillated between.
It's not a hereditary monarchy, so all of these different bigger powers vie to put someone from their camp on the throne so that they can have, some influence in that buffer state. So France wants Cunty on the throne so that they can control Poland and, all of that, and be closer to Russia and stick it in Britain's face. So D'Eon, it's a big job. It's a big, important
I
job.
would imagine so.
D'Eon goes over. They later tell us this very tall tale in their autobiography about going over as a woman, as a noble woman named Leah de Bourbon. And the whole point there is that they're...
So wait, D'Eon goes to Russia presenting as a French noble woman?
Well, this is what D'Eon tells us later in life.
Okay.
The reality is they probably went as a man, but because the tall tale is just a little too tall. The whole thing is about how Leah apparently was going to be this French noblewoman who was a French tutor to Empress Elisabeth, helping her with her French so that she could write to Louis better.
Which is in itself a little suspect, right? Because French was the official language of the Russian court at the time.
Exactly. It doesn't really make sense.
Lies,
absolute lies. But D'Eon does...
Look, we're like really suspicious of all the historical gays. We're like, Fucking lying bitch.
No, this one is a lying bitch. Like,
Oh,
for
we know
sure.
that for sure.
Dayon makes up a ton of shit about her life.
Okay.
And I'll explain why. If you stop interrupting me. No. Okay, so Dayon goes over and has to impersonate apparently a woman to get past the Austrian border. All of that's not really true. But they eventually get to Russia, and they do actually do a great job with Elizabeth and all of these Russian nobles.
They get her to sign the treaty.
Dayon loved Russia and was very impressed with all of the women there and how involved they were in politics and stuff like that. So Dayon presumably sends over a bunch of his Burgundy wine to all of these Russian nobles. They love him immediately, and that really helps him get access to Elizabeth. So he figures all that out, does a great job. Elizabeth signs the treaty. Dayon literally takes the treaty and rides all the way back to France and delivers it into Louis's hands.
It's so
directly.
dramatic and so gay.
I know.
Like we said, it's so gay to have energy.
There's something very gay about it. He must have had a lot of iced coffee to ride that
probably
hard.
Probably on the Colombian marching powder, you know.
What was that thing that Hitler's soldiers used?
Oh yeah, meth.
Oh right, just
Did
meth.
you read that book Blitzed?
Right. Meth.
Meth, ladies and gentlemen. From top to bottom. Yeah, no, there's an amazing book, Blitzed, about the whole, not just the army, the whole of Germany was methed out during
So
World War.
Dayon pulls a big blitz, a big methed out blitz, rushes back to France, hands the treaty over, and Louis is like, give you whatever you want. You're doing great, sweetie. And
Louis just gagged at this point, right? Because it's like this one that came out of nowhere, just got cunt face on the throne of Poland. You know, the Empress of Russia is like obsessed. Anyway, so like killing it again, and only still probably early 30s at this point.
Yes, it's like the early 1750s right now.
Right.
So he gets back, and Dayon asks to be put in the military because he's done diplomacy, doesn't want to go into the church, and the military is the only other thing that aristocrats do. So he gets made captain of dragoons.
Dragoons,
Which is a very drag-sounding thing, actually.
Yeah.
Dragoons.
Weren't they like ninjas? They could horse ride, they could swashbuckle, they could fight hand to hand, they could fly across the room.
I'm not sure you remember exactly what a ninja is, but the dragoons were half cavalry, half infantry.
Right, they were kind of made. They were an elite force.
Yeah, they were jumping on and off the horses in the battle, like
and they
running
had big,
around.
like floppy hats that tied up one side and massive feathers on the other side.
Yeah, it's very queer.
It's very
queer.
cool. Anyway,
so and Dayon distinguishes himself quite quickly in battle. There's some big scene where the French have lost ammunition and supplies, and it's across the field, and they can't get to it because there's gunfire. And the commander is like, fuck it, like we'll get more stuff. And Dayon is like, no, I'll go get it. So he runs across back and forth and eventually gets the equivalent of a Purple Heart for his bravery in this escapade.
It's kind of an Indiana Jones move.
Actually, it's important. It's called the Croix Saint-Louis, a St. Louis cross, and it's the one thing that Dayon will get to keep wearing after they transition.
Which is in that beautiful portrait, which we'll talk about later.
Yes, absolutely. So they have this good military career as captain of dragoons, and then the war kind of ends terribly for France.
This is the 7 Years' War.
This is the 7 Years' War, yes, which is kind of the first global conflict for Europe because they're all fighting about their colonies. And France comes off terribly. They lose Canada, and just that little thing, and a bunch of other colonies. So now Louis calls on Dayon and is like, I need you to go be my ambassador to London and help negotiate all for me.
Big job.
Exactly.
One of the most important jobs around, I would imagine.
Yeah, if the point of it is to save the colonialists, the pigs, their empire. Yeah. Dayon acquits himself very well on this adventure. He goes over with the acting ambassador to London. And actually, there's an amazing story where they meet this guy named Mr. Wood, who is the British diplomat.
And has the gayest name of all time.
Mr. Wood. So Dayon and this other ambassador guy meet Mr. Wood. Dayon gets them drunk with a bunch of Burgundy wine.
This is just carrying around this Burgundy wine everywhere.
Delicious vintage.
This is from my family's vineyard. It's kind of a pimp move.
Absolutely, wouldn't you? Mr. Wood gets drunk with the other diplomat. They're off making out in the corner, doing karaoke or whatever. And Dayon swipes all of Mr. Wood's documents and goes into the other room and copies them all down. And it's full of all of the concessions that the British are willing to make in the negotiations.
Right, because karaoke songs lasted at least 20 minutes at the time.
Yeah, they actually sang a full Catholic mass in the corner.
Drunk with their arms around each other.
So Dayon, this little conniving bitch, figures it out, hands again something directly into King Louis's hands that's amazingly valuable, and it really helps them in the negotiation. I think France gets to keep a bunch of their slavery-operated colonies. So whoopee for France,
Right.
fucking bastards. But anyway, Dayon does a good job. Good for our girly Dayon, who is now gonna live the high life in London as acting ambassador, effectively.
Yeah.
So they're running around, going to all these fabulous dinner parties, spending a ton of money from the French government, of course, and doing quite a good job. And there's a twist here because Louis secretly writes to Dayon in his own hand, a handwritten letter from the king saying, hey, buddy, can you do some reconnaissance and look around the southeastern coast of England and just see where we might be able to plan a little revenge invasion? Because he's really salty about the British doing so well.
Right.
And so he literally writes this incredibly incriminating letter. If anyone saw this letter, it would be grounds for war, right? For the British to go to war.
Like extreme trust in Dayon.
Yes, yeah. And it also gives Dayon a big head because Dayon thinks the king's asking me for personal favors, basically. You know? So that becomes really important because it gives Dayon a huge bargaining chip, right? And
the letter, that is.
the letter, right. The letter is basically Dayon's guarantee that the French government can't fuck with him.
Yeah.
Because it's
what a
so...
fool the French king was. To keep saying,
I mean...
a fool!
Literally, that's why Madame de Pompadour was running shit.
Of course.
He was an absolute moron. Dayon is planning this invasion. He thinks he's working for the king. And then suddenly the French government are like, you're spending too much money, buddy. It's time to come home.
And what, excuse me now, I have to put a pin in it there for 1 second. What was this crazy silhouette of a person spending all their money on at this time? What does one spend the money on? What kind of drugs? What kind of music?
Well, first of all, they have to ship all the wine over from Burgundy.
For all the bribes.
Secondly...
But she can bill that to Versailles. So that's
She is, yeah. She's
right?
billing
That's tax write-off.
she's billing everything to
She's billing
Versailles.
everything to fucking Versailles.
That's the problem. The French government is like, stop spending all of this money.
Okay.
So he is living an incredibly high life. They also have to entertain all of the British diplomats.
Right, some gorgeous like townhouse in Mayfair, I would imagine.
Also a beautiful house. They,
Yeah.
you know, they are also buying books, living their life.
Right,
you know?
and books at the time were quite expensive, weren't they? Like,
Yeah.
just to buy a book would be probably around
like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
They're very expensive. They're only for the rich. So Dayon is basically flabbergasted when suddenly the French government is like, you're being a dick and you're coming home. So Dayon gets this letter from the Comte de Guerchy, who's going to be the new, and who was the commander in the battlefield, actually, where Dayon
the
had...
cowardly one that wants to
Yeah.
leave all the ammo on the thing. Yeah.
So Dayon had already showed him up a little bit. And so now he's coming in and he's going to be the
With an axe
ambassador.
to grind.
And he's like more of he's more noble. He's higher up.
He's more of a tough than they are as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that kind of rankles Dayon because Dayon is like, I'm doing a great job. I'm young, dumb, full of cum, like doing...
Right, now you say young, dumb, and full of cum, and it just begs the question. Where is the romantic partner in all this?
From what we can tell, there's nothing. Like they just seem to have no romantic ties
What a
whatsoever.
flair for, storytelling and all the rest of it. There's absolutely no romantic partner at all.
I think they might have been asexual. Like they might have been actually like clinically asexual.
Yeah.
But there was one story, and there are some later stories where there are apparent flirtations after they transition. But
okay.
There was one story about some princess in Russia who apparently put the moves on him back then. But it doesn't seem possible because she was
Some
like
feral princess.
No, she was like 11 years old or something. So,
feral.
And she writes about it like in her memoirs, and it's like, honey, you're embarrassing yourself. So Dayon is an asexual king, just not interested in any of that.
Okay.
And
shame, really. Some they have a lot to give.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But they basically get hounded by the French government to hand everything over, to give back the documents, to vacate the premises and go back to France.
Now
And
tell me that they keep the letter, the incriminating letter.
of course, so Dayon is like, sweetie, I'm gonna publish all of this shit and not send it back to you unless you give me my money and let me keep my job.
See, this is why gay people are just genuinely
That's
smarter.
why queer people get things done.
Yeah. Because we're
Blackmail.
conniving, horrible, black-hearted individuals. Blackmail.
So Dayon makes good on this promise, and it's actually a big scandal because they publish all of this state correspondence,
Wow.
all of these private letters. The Comte de Guerchy, his nemesis, comes off looking very bad in all of it.
Because he didn't handle the situation at all.
Yeah, because he can't do anything. He tries to get the British to extradite Dayon. He tries to get Dayon poisoned. He tries to kill Dayon, apparently, according to Dayon. Dayon's a bit of a drama queen.
Again, sorry. I was on the edge of my seat there, but I remember it's according to that one.
Right, yeah. You have to take everything with a grain of salt. But they were definitely trying to do some shady shit to get Dayon, out of the house. But Dayon publishes all this stuff, is able to negotiate a deal with Louis, who's like, he's basically more valuable to me over there than he is here. So let him stay there and continue to be an informant in Britain. And he, of course, still has this letter, so Louis has to keep him happy. And Dayon basically gets like £12,000 a year or something to do fuck all. And just for perspective, you could rent a £350 house in central London, a nice house at the time, a year. So Dayon comes off perfectly in this. But the one bad thing is that they kind of cut their career short. And that because they can't really work officially as in government as a diplomat anymore after they've done this. It was effectively treason, to publish all this stuff.
But they still have the allowance and the house in Mayfair.
Perfect place to do a little meth from and just plan another invasion of Britain.
Yeah.
Act 2. Mademoiselle Dayon is born.
Actually, Dayon has a very sort of difficult time in this period because there are a bunch of lawsuits for libel and slander after all of these publications. But the most interesting thing that happens is that in the early 1770s, rumors begin to circulate that Dayon may in fact be a woman.
Okay.
Dun dun. And it gets to such a point that people are making public bets about Dayon's gender, which apparently was sort of a thing. There was another woman named Catherine Macaulay who was a historian, and because she wrote history, everyone in London was like, well, she must be a man if she writes so well. And so they actually started making bets about her being a man as well.
And it wouldn't be that difficult really at the time if you were like to present as like a slider man.
I think it's a pretty big acting challenge.
Yeah.
But Dayon figures it out. So this is what we don't understand, is where did that rumor start and why? And it seems to most scholars that Dayon probably started it themselves. And then you have to explain
I reckon
that.
the Kardashian mom De Pompadour, I bet you she started that rumor. Because she's playing three-dimensional chess. You know what I mean? She's like, how do I kind of start to fucking, poison the well a little bit with Dayon?
That would be possible.
Interesting. Anyway, it's fun to think about.
If not for the fact that she was absolutely dead by that point.
Ah, from the grave. She was hooted from the grave.
But
Carry on.
Spreading rumors
How
from
dare
hell.
you? Don't question me.
So Dayon is apparently spreading these rumors that they're a woman, and we have to ask ourselves why. Theory one is that they thought that maybe by becoming a woman, they would be forgiven by the French government and able to come back home. But that doesn't really make any sense because there were tons of other people living in exile, and they never really pulled anything like this. And it's such a crazy chess game to imagine pulling that off, and then that allowing you to come home. The other theory is that Dayon was out of money, and we know that homegirl did like to spend, so maybe they were placing these bets. The bets are on the London Stock Exchange, basically. It's all of these bankers in the pubs around the London Stock Exchange who are placing bets on whether Dayon has a vagina or a penis. It's absolutely insane. And Dayon even runs into one of these pubs one day with their sword.
Stop it! Stop betting on
talking
me."
about me!
Yeah.
And that doesn't do anything to...
Very famous, though. I mean, I'm kind of struck by kind of how kind of famous they've become, in the with the general populace and stuff like that. No?
Well, after they published all of that state correspondence and stuff, Dayon kind of became an international celebrity in France, in England, in America, because that had never been done before. Nobody had. This is also the century of journalism.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like the start of the internet a little bit, right? Kind of in terms of
minus the internet part.
Minus the internet. But I'm kind of interested, it kind of interests me though when there is a giant leap in mass communication amongst humankind, how these kind of you'd say how we're still managing to kind of understand the internet and the pitfalls we've learned that exist therein. But when the printing press came and everyone started reading tabloids back then, and there was probably 1,000 newspapers like printing in New York and London and all the rest of it all the time.
Well, in this century, there are
Yeah.
that things
so it's
really
kind
ramp
of
up.
like, it's not the same, but it's kind of like the common man has access to a lot more information than they previously
Exactly.
had. So they become fascinated with characters like Dion, you know?
Information moves much faster, and it moves globally too, right?
Right.
You can ship these pamphlets over to the Americas and stuff like that.
Like a sheep farmer in Australia could be, you know, placing a bet on whether Dion
Right.
is in fact a man or a woman.
Fuck your sheep, read the newspaper.
Arrives into a pub and was like, "Stop betting on whether or not I'm."
Yeah, so this is the second theory, that they're basically trying to drive up the bets about
well,
their
that
true
would make
gender.
sense because, you know,
It makes sense, but again, it's sort of like, how would you know that people would care that much, that they would be that into it? I mean, it could be. But the one part that doesn't make sense for me with that theory is that Dion continued being a woman for their entire lives, like well past the French Revolution, well past all of these bets went away. There was no reason really to continue doing that.
probably just one of those things that everyone was just betting on, nothing to do with her.
Well, no, I think Dion started the rumors themselves, and this was just a happy coincidence that people started betting on it.
Which brings us to the question, you know, why? And so, you know, I guess what was happening was they have decided that they were going to start making a transition.
Yes, exactly. I think the only way to explain it is that it was a deeply personal transformation. And Dion had been busy acquiring this big library. We have the whole catalog of the library. We know that a lot of the books in it were about women's rights and about women's issues. So Dion was very interested in, you know, this sort of Enlightenment era debate about what women could do and what women could be. And it seems that Dion sort of basically thought that women were just morally and spiritually superior to men, which is like, maybe not wrong. But there are, after all, a ton of shit men in Dion's life running the world and not doing a very good job of it. So for whatever reason, Dion feels that has some personal transformation and begins to claim that they're a woman. And they invent this whole story about how they were born a girl but then raised as a boy in order to secure an inheritance, which only half...
She give an interview to like People magazine or something. It's like a sit down with Diane Sawyer.
She actually does have memoirs written about her, I think. Yeah, there's I don't think she writes her own thing, actually. She writes with this other guy, and it's telling that story. Because the big scoop...
Baba Walters.
The Baba Wawa interview is that Dion is a woman who has been a successful diplomat and soldier, right? It's kind of like a very fantastical 18th century story for that the press loves.
Yeah.
So the French king is like kind of thought that
actual fuck.
thought that dude was a dude from that time when I almost fucked him at that party. So he's confused, and he sends over this guy named Drouet to ascertain what the anatomical deal is. And so Dion plays Drouet like a fiddle. We have no idea how this happens, but Dion is able to convince Drouet that she is anatomically female. Tits, pocket pussy, and all.
Right.
So from that point on, the French government believes that Dion is a woman. And
and Dion is presenting and living as a female in London at this point.
Well, this is where it's kind of weird because yes, but they're also still wearing their military uniform. They refuse to dress as a woman. They don't want. So I guess we would call it like transmasculine today or something like that. Yeah. Like they still want to present in this kind of like man about town way, but she says she's a woman.
Fascinating.
So she accomplishes this very public gender transition and convinces all these people. I mean, it's interesting. There's a story of another transgender, or what we think is a transgender sex worker in New York in the early 1800s. And we know from the legal case that she was able to convince one of her Johns that she also had a vagina.
I'm sure there was somebody molding some strange piece of like clip-on autonomy.
Probably like some like rough cow tongue or something just wrapped up.
Let's not spend too much time
Really? I think we
hypothesizing
could dig into this
Really?
more.
Yeah.
No, so we know that it's possible. Like there's some kind of prosthetic innovation going on in the vagina department at the time.
So did this French diplomat try to like put a ring on it?
No, Drouet goes back to France and is just like, yeah, she's a woman.
Okay, she's a woman.
What's interesting for me, though, at this point is where's Daon's family in all of this?
Yeah.
Like, Daon's father has died at this point, so he can't say shit. But the mother is still alive. His sister is still alive, living in Burgundy. And they're completely silent. I mean, maybe it just didn't get back to them. As we know, there was no internet in this century, as you famously pointed out earlier. But yeah, there's no sort of like public debate around it, which is interesting.
And they're asking a lot of
From the family, at least. There's no public debate.
of the populace, because you're like, basically they're saying, I am a woman, but not only I'm a woman that doesn't necessarily want to dress like a woman. I'm a woman, but I've earned my military prowess. So I'm going to live as a woman, but I'm going to wear men's clothes. I mean, that is just a mind bend, I'm sure.
It's interesting how she uses the military uniform as a kind of like desexualizer almost, you know? It's like she feels that she can be a woman or a man with the military uniform, whereas at the time, obviously, there are very sort of strict societal rules about what men wear and what women wear. So it's kind of funny how the military uniform allows her to exist in that weird non-binary between that she's asking the public to understand. So as I said, you know, this had happened before. People had stories of this. The Joan of Arc's, Hannah Snell, that woman who fought in the Navy.
The transition is kind of happening spiritually, physically. Everything in London is starting to kind of like, okay.
Yes, exactly.
And she's convinced the French diplomat that she is in fact a woman.
Yes, and then something huge happens. Louis croaks back in France in 1774. So overnight, all of Daon's diplomatic leverage, you know, the incriminating letter and all of that, kind of evaporates. And she sort of has to figure out now what to do. And the new king, Louis XVI, and his queen,
Boring as fuck.
Marie Antoinette, have to figure out what to do with this spy soldier woman over in London who's kind of always seems to have a limelight on her, and one that doesn't make the French monarchy look very good. Because I think there's also a side to this story where it's like the French were kind of like, the French government came off as duped, you know, because Daon had managed to convince everyone apparently.
And play them like in several ways.
Yes,
yeah.
so I think that's why Daon was kind of a thorn in their side. And so they basically begin negotiations and say, okay, Daon, if you're a woman, then you're allowed to come back to France, but you have to live and dress exclusively as a French noblewoman, right? And with all of the constraints and sort of societal pressures that comes with. So Daon is like, fuck that, no. I still have all of these documents. I'll publish them again, motherfuckers. And again, our queen just coming through with the blackmail. Yeah. We love it. We love to see it.
But the blackmail's getting a bit old at this point, though, isn't it? I mean,
and it's also not...
She needs a hit. She needs a hit like a fucking crackhead needs a hit.
No,
right?
exactly. It's not going to work this time.
Yeah.
Like so Louis is dead, so her leverage is gone, and the new king and queen send over a very famous playwright at the time, Beaumarchais, who wrote The Marriage of Figaro, Barbara of Seville. Your favorite plays, of course. We have read them.
Favorite karaoke song.
Love them.
Yeah.
I love the beginning and the middle and the end.
Figaro.
So Beaumarchais comes over, and he's very foxy, but not in the like hot sense, in the cunning sense.
Oh.
And he is kind of Daon's match in this negotiation game. So Beaumarchais does a great job for the king and queen. Daon doesn't really come off that great. This whole period is known as the transaction. And by the end of 1776 or something, Daon has been officially allowed to come back to France as long as they dress and live as a woman. So they finally set sail in 1777. They land in France, and from the get-go, remember, they're still dressed in this military uniform, so they still kind of look like a man. From the get-go, they start causing trouble. They go to this convent that's run by the king's sister. The king's sister tattles on Daon for wearing the military uniform immediately. All the paparazzi are informing on Daon in one way or another. So, you know, it's just like constant pressure to live in this way that she doesn't want to live.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine can you imagine what they must have been going through? I mean, to transition so publicly in a period of history like this, and then also just be sent to convents and, like, you know, going back and forth to London and people laying beds. I mean, that's just, the mind boggles.
Yeah, no, it's a huge amount of pressure. And then Daon also tells us that there's this scene where they go back home and they get out of the carriage, and Daon's mother sees her, and faints and apparently at one point says, "I would rather see you dead than in your uniform." It's like, okay, I think we know where he got the drama from.
Yeah.
So this probably was a made-up story, but Déon's mother wants Déon to live as a woman, wants her to be okay in society and sort of take up the skirts and this new role in life that they've chosen for themselves. And then the town that they go home to in Burgundy sticks up for Déon and is like, no. This bitch
She's our
fought
girl.
in the war.
Yeah.
She's our little local hero, and she's allowed to wear whatever fucking uniform she wants. So it's an interesting kind of like...
Yeah, leaves the French, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good for them.
Little French village drama.
Yeah.
What I wouldn't give to be at the center of it.
Yeah.
So Déon...
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Déon then is tattled on again by some more informants, and Queen Marie Antoinette is like, okay, I have an idea. I'll gift her this gorgeous new wardrobe and she'll be forced to love it and she'll just wear it and be happy and everything will be perfect. Idiot. Because Déon
Typical Marie Antoinette.
Typical idiotic
Thinking
Marie
everybody
Antoinette.
wants to be like...
She just sucked. She's an idiot. So Déon now has to get fitted for all of these new dresses, right? And it is actually extremely uncomfortable at times.
I mean, can we talk about that for a second? Because, like, unless you're doing that from birth and you're, like, mentally and physically kind of prepared for this is no small feat.
Yeah, and even then, it's gonna like crush your lungs and
Yeah,
crack
well, they were
your
like
ribs.
geishas. I mean, their bodies
Yeah,
molded around.
you're wearing a corset.
I mean, I'm
right
literally
now.
wearing a corset right now. I hope I'm not pouring out of it either.
No, you look fabulous.
Thank you very much.
So, but yes, there's the corset that like crushes your entire rib cage,
Yeah.
that the tits come popping out, and then there's this big whalebone like scaffolding, literally made from the bones of a whale that you have to wear around to make the skirts all flowy and go out really far. Lots of undergarments, lots of ruffs coming out of every crevice.
Sounds like my dream.
Your
come true.
absolute wet dream.
Yeah.
No, but it's Déon's nightmare. So Déon has this whole design fitting, wet dream for you.
Yeah.
And they're crying the entire time and they even run into the bathroom and lock themselves in. And the dressmaker is like the premier fashion designer of the time. And she's trying to understand, her name's Rose Bertin. And she, very designing dresses for the queen. Like she's at the top of her game. And Déon just doesn't give a shit about any of it. He's like, she's like, I don't want to wear any of this. Locks herself in the bathroom. There's actually an amazing quote where she says, my body is like my mind. It cannot be content with being embroidered in lace.
I love that. My body is like my mind. It cannot be content with being embroidered in lace.
Your body could be content with being embroidered in lace.
Yeah, once in a while. Now, I mean, not on a daily basis, but yeah, totally.
Well, I know, and that's the thing is like I do sympathize. It's like she says it takes 4 hours to do the they call it a toilette for women in the morning when they get dressed. It takes 4 hours.
Interrupted you during your toilet this morning.
That was different. That was purely sexual. So Rose, this fabulous fashion designer, all of her work is basically going to waste on Déon, who doesn't care, who doesn't give a fig for it. But Déon has to wear all of these dresses. Déon has to go present herself to the king and queen at Versailles in November 1777, the scene that you read us earlier. Everyone is ogling is vying for a chance to ogle her. Because they've all been reading about this figure for so long, and
also, can we just talk about for 1 second as well? I really am just to bring it back. It's not to be underestimated what's about to happen on the world stage with the French Revolution and 1777. So it's a year after the American War of Independence, which is really the dawn of enlightenment, democracy, the powers and strengths of the individual, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there is Déon, literally like riding this wave with the very crest, like unapologetically asking for recognition from the most upper echelons of the European states.
It's very much like individual rights, versus the state. Yeah. And I think that's the whole point of a lot of this Enlightenment philosophy is to proclaim the sanctity of those individual rights.
Like that is, and then coupled with all of the achievements and kind of accolades and the full life. I mean, that's trans excellence right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's why the trans issue kind of intersects for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Even today, like all of these issues about bathroom use or sports or whatever all come down to, you know, a personal right to decide what you want to do with your life in the world.
Yeah. So many amazing metaphors with her. It's like it's just the word trans is just it's true for her, but it's also just true for humanity at the time.
Yeah.
Like, shaking off.
Everyone is trans. at the
Everyone
time.
is transitioning. So
No,
go
that's
ahead.
true. Everyone is transitioning at the time. Yeah, it's a big ideological transition.
Yeah.
So everyone is dying to get a view of Dayon at this big court presentation where she walks in this gorgeous blue silk dress and
Crying.
sobbing. Yeah, and she meets Marie Antoinette and is like, "Ugh, this is so hard. I hate it. Blah blah blah." And Marie Antoinette is like, "I just gave you all these dresses. Shut up." And so it ends up being, you know, they have like their little rapprochement.
Photo up in the throne room.
Dayon sits on the queen's lap like Santa. You know, they get their photo, and actually there were a lot of photos of Dayon in the press at the time. There were all of these engravings, all of these like diagrams, almost trying to understand her kind of multi-gender existence. You know, there's one where she's split down the middle, and on one half she's wearing all women's clothes and on the other half she's wearing all men's clothes. So everybody gives a shit about this. As a result, Dayon is, even though she's unhappy, she's a fucking celebrity. Like she's going around.
How unhappy could she be when she's that? That much of a.
She loved the limelight. She wanted to be relevant.
And is this the time where the portrait is made of her, the very famous portrait that's at the National Portrait Museum in London?
That's a bit later in the 1790s. She's a bit older.
So we'll talk about that later because it's such a great photo.
Yeah, but at this time she's basically presenting as a woman, but she's so angry that she has to present as a woman that she is apparently very gruff, like doesn't, you know, shave her arms or anything like that. Like just doesn't allow anyone to believe that she is a full woman. Like,
yeah.
So it's kind of her fuck you to Louis and Marie Antoinette, I think, to be like, okay, you can put me in these laces, but I'm still gonna fart and drink as much as I want.
Yeah.
So she really acts like a soldier, you know? And she's going to all these fabulous dinner parties. One of them is with Ben Franklin in the late 1770s when he's over there trying to drum up support for the French Revolution. And Dayon is in full support of the American Revolution. So
of course,
so she actually gives him some British intel and proclaims her support and all
So
that.
are you telling me that the Americans won the War of Independence because a trans spy gave Ben Franklin the information
transgender
that
women
sealed the deal?
founded the United States of America?
There you go,
heard it
ladies.
here on this podcast.
Historical homos coming at you.
George Washington, great tits.
You imagine George Washington if Dale had a gun, George would be like, what?
Ben Franklin was a good sport.
Ben Franklin was a real bon vivant knocking around Paris at the time. I mean, doing the good work. I mean, raising the money, but having a good time while he was
taking
doing
his
it.
sweet time.
Yeah.
Boning all of those syphilitic Parisian whores, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And there's actually rumors that Dayon and Ben Franklin are an item after this. It's like wherever Dayon goes, people start pretending that.
That's because they're trying to sexualize
Exactly.
everybody.
There's misogyny to it, I think. So Dayon is having this fabulous time, support for the American Revolution. Eventually, though, she keeps getting into trouble because she keeps going out in her military uniform. And so Louis is
wasted,
like...
just wandering. With Ben Franklin.
prosthetic vagina hanging out.
Walking around, holding the ball, shine bright like a diamond.
I bet Dayon would have been so fun to party with.
She probably would have been a big Rihanna fan too.
Just champagne, meth, dinner parties with
Chronic.
Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
Dayon loved hip hop. So Dayon actually starts this big campaign to go fight in the American Revolution. That's the other thing that really pisses Louis off. She starts writing all these letters to all the army wives, the wives of all the nobles who run the army. And she's like, hey, help me. I was in the military. There's no reason that I shouldn't be allowed to go fight, which kind of makes sense. But everybody basically thinks it's a big joke. And Louis, after a while, is like, okay, your letter writing campaign and you're wearing a man's military uniform. I'm sending you to jail. That's how life used to work, everyone.
He just got sick. He was walking in his garden. Some little peon came up and be like, yo, Dayon now is writing letters to all the military wives. And he's like, what? Okay.
Jail.
Shut up, bitch in jail. Yeah.
So yeah, it's and it's not really jail. It's sort of like a castle.
It's white collar crime.
It's like a castle that Dayon can't leave. It's like Cry Me a Fucking River.
Right.
But
Let me
Dayon-
guess. She has the burgundy from the
Yeah, she has plenty of wine.
to bribe everyone.
Has nice clothes. Has a fire. It's like it actually sounds like a great holiday. So
Time out more than a jail.
A timeout, exactly.
Timeout.
And after 19 days, again, not hard, Dayon is released, but has also started another letter writing campaign where
can't
she's
help
like,
herself.
I'm the new Joan of Arc. They're trying to kill me, blah, blah, blah. And Louis is like, shut up and go home. So Dayon goes home to live with her mother and her sister and has a couple quiet years. And then in the 1780s, learns that people are trying to sell her house back in London and all of her precious
The
books,
fucking books.
which is devastating.
Act 3. Down and out in London. Oi, this bit about me.
Dayon gets over there and basically sets up shop in England and doesn't go home for the rest of her life. The next big thing that happens is the French Revolution in 1789, which of course Dayon is all for because she's this big, Enlightenment
Well, her
intellectual.
like waking up in the morning is an act of revolution. So
Yes. No,
know?
exactly. She is. She's a
I've
revolutionary.
always thought that
in so many ways.
about trans people in general. Walking out the door is an act of revolution. It's just an act of bravery.
It's transgressive,
Yeah.
And Dayon is kind of able to live more freely, I think, in London. In a way, Dayon is still presenting as a woman, but doesn't have to deal with all this annoying French bullshit. Because remember, the English at this point have a constitutional monarchy. They're not like, they don't live in the same kind of strict,
Absolute monarchy.
absolutist
Yeah.
environment.
And
So
it's Mad King George, isn't it?
yes, yeah, around
Yeah,
about
and
this
the
time.
Prince Regent and all that kind of malarkey that was going on at the time.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
Dayon actually because she supports the French Revolution, she writes a letter to the revolutionary government when they go to war with Austria. And she's like, hey, I'm really good at going to war. Let me do it. I've already done it. And some of the people in the revolutionary parliament are like, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And there are women fighting in the revolution at this point, so they think that Dayon could lead them maybe, but it all goes to shit because Dayon can't afford to get back at this point.
She literally can't afford to cross the channel.
Well, because after the revolution, her cushy little annual pension runs out, which was never really paid on time anyway. So she hasn't really been saving a lot of money and doesn't have anything to live on.
She broke.
She broke, which is what starts her next phase in London. After she can't after she can't make it in time for the French Revolution, she starts the equivalent of an 18th century OnlyFans and begins performing in drag on stage, sword fighting.
Stop.
Fabulous.
Oh my
Absolutely
God.
chic. So, and she's in these like dowdy old, middle-aged woman dresses, like black and late. We have all these engravings that kind of show her fencing with these big, famous swordsmen, and she becomes the most famous swordswoman in the world, basically.
Wow.
So there's even one that is organized by the Prince of Wales. Like she has lots of fabulous friends, but
Yeah.
for some reason they don't seem to really help her very meaningfully. So she gets injured in 1796 and she has to kind of wind down. I mean, she's in her 60s at this point.
Which
or
is
something.
which is already way above the average lifespan of the time.
Yeah,
Especially for somebody
extreme.
that's just kind of lived the way they've lived. I mean, very sturdy stock.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's the no fucking. Maybe we should stop fucking.
Maybe.
Nah.
Yeah. No.
Nah.
No.
So Dayon retires basically with this Navy widow named Mrs. Cole, and they live together. Two cute old gals
Bless Mrs. Cole.
in a London apartment. Dayon sort of tries to write her memoirs, gets an advance, gets some money from that, but it's kind of a slow march to death and poverty. So it doesn't
Cheery stuff.
It doesn't end beautifully for Dayon, but she lives until 1810, and she's still presenting as a woman. She's very famous. Mary Wollstonecraft, who writes A Vindication of the Rights of Women, a sort of early feminist. She uses the Chevalier Dayon, as she's known at that point, the female version of Chevalier.
Yeah.
She uses her as an example of what women can accomplish and what women can do. Like she's really spoken about a lot as this kind of new representative for female accomplishments. But then, and she sees Napoleon, she hates Napoleon, all of that. And by 18...
Oh, yeah. So what was her take on Napoleon, interestingly? She hated Napoleon?
She thought he was a dick.
Right,
was her
because that
take.
was like the right wing. That was like the right wing takeover of the French
Yeah,
Revolution.
because it kind of like all the stuff with the French Revolution kind of
fell away.
it falls apart. But eventually she dies in 1810, and she's 82 at that
Wow,
point.
I mean that really blows my mind, especially around that time. I mean, like what she saw in her life.
Yeah,
I mean,
pretty good century to witness, 1728
yeah.
to 1810.
and like not just on the sidelines, in the room where it happened as
Absolutely.
Lin-Manuel.
She wrote that song. She actually wrote Hamilton. That's why we have that.
Lin-Manuel should do are you listening, Lin-Manuel?
Oh my God, we should talk to Lin-Manuel about the
Literally
Hamilton
like a
version of
stage.
Chevalier.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Producers?
French hip hop, that French hip hop. It's so super chic.
That famous 18th century French hip hop. Actually, that sounds dope.
Yeah.
So she dies. Mrs. Cole does the friendly thing and washes her body and tries to prepare her for burial, and then discovers that there's a surprise under
Yeah.
the skirts. And so she calls in a team of gentlemen, because only gentlemen can figure this issue out. And there's a lawyer, there's a journalist, there's a professor of anatomy, there's like doctors, and they all come in and they confirm that Dayon is anatomically male. So it's this really invasive
Yeah.
post-mortem. And the worst part about it is the journalist gets someone to draw Dayon's genitals, and then that's
God.
released to the press, and that gets carbon copied and broadcast all over the French and British press media.
So even in death, the indignities continue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a sad end. And also it it has this big effect where everyone's sort of like, wait, so she's not a woman? So she's not this, impressive female figure capable of all this stuff? Like, I think many prominent women especially are disappointed by it, And it also has the effect of kind of making Dayon into a bit of a circus freak that people don't understand at the time, right? So Dayon kind of gets forgotten for a while, and somebody eventually writes a biography of him of her in the 19th century. And then a British sexologist, a psychologist of sex in the early 20th century, Havelock Ellis, starts writing about gender dysphoria. And basically, he has a really interesting way of putting it. He says, the inversion here is in the affective and emotional sphere. And in this large sphere, the minor symptom of cross-dressing is insignificant.
Wow. That's really kind of like nails it.
Yeah, it's basically like, no, you guys, like, it's not about the outward stuff. It's not about the behaviors. Like, those are just accidentals. It's actually about an interior emotional, transition or whatever, change. So yeah, and he uses Dayon's name for that. He calls it Aeonism.
Aeonism.
And so that's kind of a nice, tribute.
Yeah, and knowing what we know now, and looking back from our, from 2023, she is an example of what women can achieve, and the perseverance of the spirit, of the human spirit.
No, totally. And I think we have to remember her as a transgender woman, because that's how she wanted to be recognized.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing it always makes me think is, like, again, how trans issues impact everyone, but like specifically gay people, because we have to deal with that all the time as gay men of being pigeonholed into like not being allowed to be too girly. Like, even my own mother is like, are you sure you want to wear that sometimes?
Well,
it's
I was a dedicated transvestite until the age of 6.
So was I.
Until I realized that it was, when I was going out into the street and everyone else was like, I wouldn't really do that if I was
King Louis was like, would you like to
80s.
bone? 8-year-old.
And I often wonder, that's why you see a lot of younger people now that just are afforded so much more kind of rights and privileges by their parents, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about Dayon is that I think people sort of wonder whether we can really call her transgender, or whether she's some other special case. And I just think that's fucking bullshit. It's like, clearly she made a decision for 33 years of her life to do this.
But it also reminds me a little bit of like people back in the, when we talk about people from this particular era as well, and they're like, oh, were they really gay? It's like that whole thing, like, but it was a different time. It's like, no, listen, if you're sucking dick, you're fucking gay. You know what I mean?
Just ask our German producer.
Alzheimer.
Mr. Alzheimer.
That's his drag name.
That's a joke that none of you will understand. So what did you learn today?
Well, I think that this Havelock Ellis really sums it all up, doesn't it? Can you read it first?
Havelock Ellis.
Havelock Ellis. I really do
Kind of
think...
a crazy name.
Yeah.
Havelock.
Yeah, that name has disappeared into the annals of history. But I would like... I genuinely think, I mean, I couldn't put it better myself, and it really actually encompasses everything that I feel like I've learned and what people should take away from this episode. But can you read it again? Because you did such a good job.
The inversion here is in the affective and emotional sphere. And in this large sphere, the minor symptom of cross-dressing is insignificant.
Right there, ladies and gentlemen. Can we send that to the chair of the GOP?
Let's send that to the Tennessee government that just outlawed drag shows or whatever. Did you see that?
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, right, because that's really what's going on.
But you know what's going to change it all? This episode.
Yeah, we're literally going to change the world. Well, on that note, that has been our wonderful Chevalier Down episode of Historical Homos. I'm Donal Brophy.
And I'm Bash. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow us at historical.homos on Instagram. You can also go on our website, historicalhomos.com, and follow us there. Please like, please subscribe, please share, please tell your friends, your family, your lovers. Leave a 5-star review, unless you hate Donal, and then you can leave a 4-star review.
Well, that's highly unlikely, really, isn't it? Fan favorite. Okay. Thank you, guys. See you next time.